Morrowind's Tribunal DLC was a bit of a letdown, at least for me. There are many aspects of that expansion I take issue with design-wise, but the finale, that was something I really enjoyed. The Clockwork City has always been one of the most interesting locations for me as a steampunk fan in the entirety of the Elder Scrolls universe, and I've received dozens of comments from you telling me not only is ESO's Clockwork City the best interpretation of Sotha Sil's realm, but also one of the best pieces of DLC content ever created for this MMO. So let's see if you're right. Today we are going to test, compare, and judge the differences between the Clockwork City 15 years apart. Now that's easier said than done. This is no small feat. To create this video alone, I had to play through the entire Tribunal DLC for Morrowind and 100% complete the Clockwork City DLC for ESO just to ensure I got every morsel of content I could. It's around 40 hours of gameplay. I also record in 2K, so if you're wondering how much raw footage I have, we're pushing 300 gigabytes. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe so I can buy a new hard drive and keep making them. Let's address the elephant in the room, probably the most pressing concern most of you veterans have. The Clockwork City in Morrowind isn't necessarily a city. It's not even an open world area. It's more like a long dungeon. Unlike Vardenfell, which I've already made a video on, the fundamental design of the Clockwork City is pretty different between both of these titles. Surprisingly though, there is a good bit of overlap with notable characters and places, which I hope you'll find interesting. Just like how the Clockwork City starts in Tribunal, let's start with the insane red-haired woman in Mournhold. Like it or not, Almalexia is a pretty important character to the Clockwork City story. Why? Spoiler alert, she goes insane and kills Sotha Sil. Anyway, just like in Tribunal, you start your adventure to the Clockwork City in Almalexia's temple. You can actually talk with her a bit. She doesn't say anything super noteworthy. The more important character you interact with is Devaith Fear. Obviously, besides the Tribunal, Devaith might be one of the most important and famous Dunmer of all time, but we'll get to him later. Mournhold.
City of...
In both games, Mournhold is your gateway to the Clockwork City. It's said in the Elder Scrolls 3, the Clockwork City is buried so deep beneath Mournhold, it's essentially inaccessible, even by other members of the Tribunal. Hell, Almalexia literally needs your help to get a ring so she can teleport there. It's very well hidden. In ESO, not so much. Yeah, it's technically underneath Mournhold, but it's like a 2-minute walk behind a waterfall. In fact, as we learn throughout the story, random people just tend to stumble across the Clockwork City. Which brings me to my next point, still kinda related to Mournhold. The Clockwork City isn't the size of a city in ESO. In the older Elder Scrolls games, specifically Morrowind, it was speculated or believed the city was a massive underground complex beneath Mournhold. Literally, an underground city. In ESO, they went with a different interpretation. The city is miniature, encased in this beach ball-sized contraption, and you shrink yourself to get inside. There's much debate and conjecture about this. I don't really want to get into it. Some people believe this dome is just a teleporter, and there's several scattered across Tamriel. Some people believe it's a pocket plane or parallel universe. Some people believe all of these theories are true, and some refuse to accept ESO as canon. To each their own. Honestly, you're allowed to have your own opinion, but I would love to hear your take on where you think the Clockwork City actually is. I do want to talk about the physical design a bit, comparing the 2002 version to 2017. Now, I'm biased, I've already told you I love steampunk, but ESO's Clockwork City might be one of the most beautiful areas I've ever explored in any Elder Scrolls game. Dwemer Ruins were already my favorite thing to do in Skyrim, and this city is just that on crack. You've got swamps where the water is oil and mechanical fish are swimming around. A beautiful skybox reminding you that you're inside a mechanical contraption. The brass fortress's grand and intoxicating essence. Even simple things like bookshelves are replaced with animated machinery. Lamps and lights replace candles. It's awesome. I have almost no critique, which is not exactly how I felt about the original 2002 Clockwork City. I felt the original was too blocky. It didn't scream pinnacle of technology like I would have hoped. Seeing them side by side, you may also come to the conclusion that ESO made a mistake by making this version too advanced. After all, ESO takes place 742 years in the past. But I would actually disagree. I think the design of ESO's Clockwork City is actually more primitive than what's shown in Tribunal. Tribunal City has electricity, wires, and circuitry. ESO's does not. It more heavily relies on brass gear systems, steam power, or chemiluminescence to create light from gases, which we learn about in the main story. The fact of the matter is, the design's fidelity is higher. Of course, ESO is 15 years newer, but the in-game depictions of technology's progression over time, I think, is actually handled very well. So with all that in mind, let's start with my summary of ESO's main story for the Clockwork City. This campaign primarily revolves around Nocturnal and Clavicus Vile's infiltration of Sotha Sil's city and corruption of the living god. We're going to be compressing about 7 hours of storytelling into around 5 minutes, so obviously I'm going to miss details, but I'll make sure to include all of the important stuff. Without further ado, let's begin. The story starts in Deshawn, more specifically in the capital city of Mournhold. After accepting the quest through the menu, a lady pops out of a portal and aggressively points for you to enter. This portal takes you to the Temple of Almalexia. Anyway, the Giga Chad himself turns the corner to bless me in all his glory. Dvaith remembers me from the Halls of Fabrication, a raid I did in Morrowind, and enlists me to help him once again with the Clockwork City in search of a powerful Daedric artifact. There's actually some interesting lore here that's worth noting. Dvaith studied with Sotha Sil before he ascended and has a friendly relationship with him along with Induril Nerevar. Nerevar, bro, holy shit! He alludes that he actually knows what really happened to Nerevar.
Who's to say what really happened?
I am. And we also get the first hint of Almalexia's distaste for Sotha Sil and his city. Almalexia fears that Sotha Sil's machinery itself is tangible. They're not divine creations, and mortals can theoretically learn and study how to replicate Sotha Sil's works, which lessens the mystique and power of the Tribunal's godlyhood. Anyway, you make your way behind this waterfall, into a cave, through some ruins, and Bob's your uncle. You found the Clockwork City. When you shrink inside, Dvaith is attacked by a dark figure which rips his shadow from him, stripping his soul and most of his magical abilities. You need to navigate through the underworks of the Clockwork City and defeat his shadow so it can be reabsorbed. Dvaith then shows why he's the GOAT.
Oh my god. Finally get to see Dvaith use some of his magic.
And you make your way to the Brass Fortress. After this mission, the rest of the first act of the story isn't overly interesting. To further assist Dvaith, you need your citizenship to the Clockwork City. So, you do various tasks to increase your favor for Provost Varuni, who grants you your citizenship eventually. It's just a bunch of fetch quests. When you finally register yourself, Dvaith approaches you with a new issue. He thinks something is wrong with Sotha Sil. In fact, he thinks the living god has been replaced with an imposter. This imposter has ordered all lamps to be destroyed since the light seems to bother it. So you craft one up, sneak into position.
Come on, man. Bro, I hate the stealth in this game so much.
And shine it right in his eyeballs. This reveals the Shadow, which flees into Sotha Sil's chambers, whom you need to defeat in combat. Obviously, the High Council of the Clockwork City are in full panic mode. They just watched their Lord and Savior turn into a Shadow Demon, which clearly means he's not as divine or perfect as they assumed. Varuni thinks the High Chancellor might be behind it, since he and Sotha Sil have had their differences in the past. But upon reaching his chambers, you discover a Shrike lurking about. Shrikes are the Daedra that serve Nocturnal, the Daedric Prince of Night and Darkness.
A naked woman?
You try to track down the Chancellor by following his oily footprints and come across several of Nocturnal's Daedra. One of them just tells you everything that's happening, literally folded under no pressure. She tells us Clavicus Vile, Nocturnal, and the Chancellor came to an agreement for a powerful artifact called the Skeleton Key. This sorcerer believes the Chancellor conspired with Clavicus Vile against Nocturnal, as he's currently being protected by Clavicus's minions in a nearby stronghold.
Why did she just tell me all of the villains' plans?
We go to the stronghold to sort this out ourselves. Unsurprisingly, the Chancellor doesn't let us in, so we find another way inside. This mission requires you to power up the Imperfect to blast through layers of bedrock to infiltrate deeper inside. Now, we're going to talk about this guy later, I promise, but I think this is an Imperfect, not the Imperfect, and I'll explain why later. With the help of an Imperfect, we blast and punch our way through to the Chancellor.
No!
He surrenders immediately and explains his side of the situation, which is almost the same as the sorcerer lady, except he says a flock of talking crows stole the key. Next thing you need to do is track down these crows. They recognized me because I'd done the Crow's Wood public dungeon in Stonefalls, so again, the dialogue may be a little different. You have to help the Black Feather Court, which is this particular group of birds, with various tasks. Steal a gem. Nope. Oh, god damn. Find a poem, scare away some rival birds, and dismantle the motionless Guardian of Doom.
The Scarecrow. Okay, that's pretty funny.
After doing so, the crows tell you where they hid the skeleton key, and you battle your way up to the top of the Incarnatorium, a facility designed by Sotha Sil to birth verminous fabricants. Right before you pick up the skeleton key, Sotha Sil's shadow arrives and grabs it just before you. The shadow teleports inside the Cognitum Centralis, Sotha Sil's seat of power. It was designed to be virtually impenetrable, and to make matters worse, Nocturnal has warded off the only entrances, making it impossible to get in. However, Nocturnal's Daedra are still getting in somehow, and you discover it's through shadow portals, so you use them too to transport yourself to her plane of oblivion, Evergloam. You find the correct corresponding portal that goes inside the Cognitum, and solve a few puzzles before reaching Sotha Sil's throne. Sotha Sil is essentially locked into this helmet thing that lets him control the Clockwork City, and no one can remove him from it. The skeleton key is therefore required by Nocturnal to unlock the helmet to supplant her shadow of Sotha Sil and give her control of the city. You fight off against the shadow, weakening it severely.
Whoa! What is going on?
With Luciana repelling the darkness and Devaith suppressing the shadow, you use the skeleton key to remove Sotha Sil from his throne so he can reabsorb his shadow and regain his power.
Be gone.
You achieve nothing, little godling.
The last 30 minutes of this story is basically pure exposition with the living god himself. We will talk about that later, I promise, but most of it isn't necessary for the main story summary. It's more important for the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. As far as this summary goes, Sotha Sil thanks you for your help and gives you 2 options to pick as a reward.
I'm worried if I pick I want power, he's just gonna give me like a skill point or something like stupid, like something that I can't even use. But I am curious to see what power Sotha Sil could offer me. But knowing the Elder Scrolls Online is probably going to be garbage. I chose saving Luciana, our loyal friend who helped us repel nocturnal shadows, and say my goodbyes before wrapping it up with the story's conclusion. We're informed that Tamriel is now under threat of the Triad, a group of Daedric princes, Nocturnal, Clavicus Vile, and Mephala, who are now going after the Isle of Somerset. He asks for our help chasing them down, which I assume leads to the next DLC. Okay, let's talk about what I thought of the main campaign for the Clockwork City, and I think I said it the best during the finale. Holy shit, this is the best fucking story I've ever played in ESO. That was so good.
The writing, especially near the end, was by far and away the best I've played in this game so far. Now, that's not to say I have no complaints. The story took me between 6.5 to 7 hours to play through, and I found the beginning lackluster. Not the prologue, the bit with Devaith Fear in his shadow. That was good. The actual first few missions with acquiring your citizenship. There were a lot of fetch quests. Still, less than Tribunal, but pretty shallow storytelling for the first 2 hours. I'm trying really hard to think of other things I didn't specifically like for this DLC. Obviously, I think ESO is stupid easy and poses no challenge. Because of this, I have rules to make the game harder, including only wearing gear I can pick up within each zone. So for most of these boss fights, I don't even have shoulder pads, boots, rings, etc. I'm literally half naked. Even with those restrictions, as you can see in the background, I don't think there was a single boss fight that took me longer than 10 seconds. Again, that's a problem with ESO as a whole, but there are good boss fights in DLC content. Specifically, the last boss fight for Orsinium was pretty badass. So they've shown they can do good boss fights, they just didn't for this DLC, at least in my opinion. As I said though, I don't have much to complain about. Barring the first few hours, this is the best story I've done in ESO, bar none. It's not even close. You may hate this game. You may hate its implications on the lore, but if you've played all the ESO content I have, you would come to the same conclusion. This DLC slaps. I feel bad making this summary because if you own this DLC, you should play it for yourself. My 5 to 10 minute recap can't do it justice. It's awesome. Small confession to make before we move on. I failed. This was the first 100% challenge I couldn't do. If you're familiar with this series, you know I'm locked inside each area until I have fully completed the zone guide. Unfortunately, for the Clockwork City, one of its major achievements is to rebuild an automaton. pieces of it are scattered across Tamriel, which means not only would I have to leave the Clockwork City, but also go to new places I've never unlocked. It's not a hard achievement, but it'd spoil myself for future experiences, and I didn't think it was worth it for a target dummy. I don't even have a house I could put it in. Besides that one achievement, this zone only took 11 hours to complete, including the trial. There's actually not a lot of activities to do, as you can tell. 2 delves, 2 world bosses, 3 points of interest, it's actually pretty tiny. Doesn't mean good things can't come in small packages, but I do wish there was a little bit more to do. Let's shift the focus back to both versions of the Clockwork City. I want to talk more about some of the notable callbacks to the 2002 edition. Although, I don't know if callbacks is the right word, since technically ESO is 742 years in the past, but you know what I mean. Let's talk about my best boy, the Imperfect. I told you I was going to come back to him. The Imperfect in ESO is a world boss, an incredibly difficult boss encounter designed for multiple players. Let me rephrase that. Multiple competent players. My boy actually has a bit of a story in ESO explaining his design. You can actually talk to a Clockwork facilitator who enlists your help in training the Imperfect. He was personally designed by Sotha Sil to essentially be a form of artificial intelligence. Every time the Imperfect is destroyed, it becomes smarter. A new prototype is then made in its fabrication chamber with the new knowledge to fight again. Sotha Sil's goal for this machine is to achieve its true form, of which the information does not seem to be publicly accessible. The Imperfect in Tribunal is a really tough boss fight. For me, it was significantly harder than Almalexia. It's obviously in shambles in the Elder Scrolls 3, so I guess that explains why it's not an unkillable machine. If we take ESO's lore as canon, in almost 1,000 years of combat encounters, the Imperfect should be, well, perfect, or at least close to it anyway. This is the first time in ESO where I've been able to compare a fight with an identical entity over the course of multiple games. Canonically, my character in ESO helped train the Imperfect that I then later fought as the Nerevarine 742 years in the future, which is kind of cool. There was another Imperfect in the main campaign, which I already mentioned, so I won't go into it in detail, but the name wasn't the Imperfect, so maybe it's the broken down one next to it in Tribunal, or it's just the name of that line of machinery. You guys can let me know in the comments if you know the answer. So as far as the physical maps go for both cities, honestly, I don't know if there's much overlap, if any at all. Most of this is just speculation, but if I had to guess, the Central Gearworks and the Chamber of Sola, I think, might be this area here. It also is a massive circular auditorium with a room at the exact angle called Sotha Sacristy. The chamber itself also has a similar design with a long hallway leading to an open room at the end. As for the rest of the map, there are massive domed rooms with narrower chambers connecting them, but they don't really share any resemblance. In ESO, Sotha Sil isn't found in his dome like in Tribunal, rather he's in the Cognitum Centralis. According to the Elder Scrolls Legends, the Chamber of Lorkhan is located in this Cognitum. Sotha Sil says in Legends he needs 22 minutes to seal the Chamber of Lorkhan, and that's how long he must live to stall Almalexia, perhaps alluding to the fact that he let her torture him to death with no resistance just to stall for time. Again, the map itself is very different, I'm just trying to connect the dots with whatever I can. Of course, the biggest callback, the man of the hour, Sotha Sil. For some reason, he's a bit more talkative in ESO. But I'm not complaining. Sotha Sil, what an interesting character. He's always been mysterious to me, obviously more than Almalexia or Vivec just because of his elusiveness. I've always been interested in that Dwemer mechanical steampunk stuff, but I don't think that's it. I think I like him so much because he's an engineer and a mathematician, and I assumed he wouldn't be as deluded as the other false gods. And I was right. He's very analytical and logical, but perhaps what's most surprising is his gift of foresight. As we progress through the story, we get little hints of Sotha Sil being able to see into the future, setting up specific failsafes for Nocturnal, almost like he knew she was coming. He says a very similar thing about Almalexia at the end of the story. Okay, so does he know Almalexia is gonna kill him? Because in Tribunal, she complains that when she killed him, he didn't even, give her a second thought. He just let her.
He spoke not a word as he died, not a whisper.
So does he know right now, 700 years in the past, that she's gonna kill him one day? He mentions he suffers from a peculiar ailment. This could even be interpreted that he doesn't have free will like us and is just a passenger along for the ride. Really good writing for the story. It had me pause between dialogue options and just think about what he said. As I mentioned, it is like 20 to 30 minutes of exposition, but there are videos online of the raw conversation if you want to listen to the whole thing. The final callback I want to mention isn't necessarily between the Clockwork Cities, but with the Elder Scrolls 3 itself and the Lesser Saints of Morrowind. Specifically, these three, St. Olms, St. Lothus, and St. Felms. If you've played ESO or Morrowind, you should know who St. Olms is. There's an entire canton in Vivec City named after him, and he's the house saint of Indoril. Felms is also known for killing a bunch of Nords, and Lothus is renowned for basically creating the temple religion for the Dunmer to worship the Tribunal. In Clockwork City's 12-man raid, we learn Sotha Sil paid these saints a visit right before they died and trapped their souls in a black soul gem. He then installed these soul gems into clockwork machines, driving their spirits insane, essentially desecrating their souls, all in the name of experimentation. It's pretty messed up. You go in with your group and slay these saints and finally release their spirits. Their cries of pain are pretty grim, especially considering how much these three did for the Tribunal.
Why do we languish here? What good are we locked away? Redemption is a lie. None of us are wanted.
Huge thanks to my lovely raid group as usual. We ran it about 6 times and did every difficulty possible. We just couldn't beat the hardest mode with me dragging them down.
That was a lot of stuff on the ground.
Interrupt that if you can later. Yeah.
Oh! So this is the hardest version of this thing you can do?
Yep, it is.
Makes me feel a little bit better.
It was still a lot of fun. Before we wrap up the video, let's do a quick rapid-fire round with some of the smaller Easter eggs and mentions from the original 2002 expansion. Tribunal only has 2 different enemy types in the Clockwork City, the Hulking Fabricants and the Verminous Fabricants. I don't think Hulking Fabricants make an appearance at all, but we do get to visit one of the Verminous fabrication plants called the Incarnatorium. This place is beautiful. I love how they're grown in like back to tanks, almost like an organic being. It's very cool. In both games, these machines can only be found around the Clockwork City. Bombs am Shend is present in both games too, although in ESO it's mainly just an open cavern to explore that holds the Clockwork City vaults.
Welcome to the dwarven hold of Bombs am Shend.
Still, looks really nice though.
Look at that.
This lift will take us.
Wow, that's awesome.
Nothing even remotely close to the scale and complexity of these ruins in Tribunal, of which I am very thankful for. I hated that ruin, but it's a small little geographical callback. Sotha Sil, as far as I can tell, has some level of guilt over the murder of his good friend Nerevar. In fact, he built a shrine in his honor on the outskirts of the Clockwork City. He debated several times if he should destroy it, but is ultimately glad he didn't. Here you can find a projection of Sotha Sil and Nerevar, along with 3 coffers, which I assume represents the death of the Tribunal's mortal souls after the betrayal and rise to godhood. There's also a projection and tablet referring to his and Almalexia's defense of Mournhold against Maroon's Dagon. It's kind of funny, Almalexia's version in Tribunal is just her, with Sotha Sil nowhere to be seen. It fits her character, to say the least. I thought that was good. The Elder Scrolls Online's Clockwork City is what Morrowind's should have been. It's fascinating, and I mean that word literally. Tribunal's version is just something you have to go through. I didn't find myself coming across books, lore, or interesting alcoves where I wanted to stop and smell the roses. To me, that's what makes an area memorable, even if it's just a dungeon. As soon as I stepped foot in this place, I was getting sidetracked just by looking around and learning as much as I could. I've already mentioned I'm very biased. I love steampunk, but this was an experience. I think ESO absolutely did justice bringing this iconic location to life, and I'm not just saying that. I felt ESO's Morrowind missed the mark a little compared to the original, and on the flip side, I also thought the Tribunal DLC blew chunks for my first ever playthrough. Both of those videos are on screen now, so if my suffering sounds interesting to you, make sure to check them out. Regardless, thank you so much for sticking around to this point, and I hope to see you in the next one.